She goes, yeah, that's good. I let go of the hammer. Bang, the gun goes.
Today we're going to talk about Alec Baldwin. Greg, tell us about the videos we're going to see.
Yeah, these videos are from an interview with George Stephanopoulos about the Rust shooting, where a cinematographer was killed and the director injured. That's all you need to know.
The Ukrainian-born cinematographer quickly gelled with Baldwin.
The people who watched The Daily said that her work was beautiful. She was someone who was loved by everyone who worked with and liked by everyone who worked with and admired. Sorry. But admired by everybody who worked with her.
All right. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, okay. So first off, let's just look at how this whole thing is set up. It's advertised as Baldwin unscripted. So clearly that's a piece of PR, I would say, in that our worry is, hey, this is all going to be scripted, isn't it? We want to really hear the truth of this. And they've kind of seen us off at the pass there by going, no, this is totally unscripted, in order to countermeasure any worries we might have about this. So that obviously worries me in the first place about this. Now that it may be unscripted doesn't mean that it's not designed and it's not structured. And so we're going to see that the interviewer there has notes. My guess is they've structured out these questions. It's not blasé as to how this is going out. There is going to be some preparation, more than some preparation involved in this. The lighting there, we can see that Baldwin is very, there is a shadow side. Just so happens that the shadow side, the dark side, is his gun shooting side, his dominant hand, as we'll see later on. These things can be accidental, but in really good production, it's really often not very accidental that's the way things are set up. So already, potentially, unscripted, but by no means unstructured or undesigned in any way. Let's have a look at the rhetorical process that he uses there, or structure that he uses there. Loved by everyone, liked by everyone, and admired. That rule of three piece is actually beautifully structured, not necessarily written, but could be scripted. I mean, beautifully put together. And that admired area, that's the moment that pushes him into an emotion. Now, I guess the worry from people is that emotion real? Is it true? Here's what worries me about it, is the shading of the face. Could be shame. There's a lot of good reasons why it could be shame. But what I've noticed about people who are overcome by emotion is they forget to protect themselves from everybody seeing it. Feels to me like he wants to protect people from seeing that. Now, is that because of the shame of people seeing the emotion, or is it that it's not quite good enough? He doesn't think his performance of that is good enough. I'm not sure. I'd like to hear from everybody else as to what they think about this. But I tell you, it doesn't ring quite right for me. Greg, what do you got about this one?
Yes, I'm going to start by saying when we talk about scripted, I think most of this is unscripted. By that, I mean, I don't think he had lines prepared for everything. He had areas that he's willing to talk about, those things that he's uncomfortable talking about where he's been coached. And I'll point those out because they're pretty easy to see. You can tell that somebody said, stay away from this, and you'll see it late in the videos. But here I do see a little grief muscle in him. And whether that's acting, I'm not a great Alec Baldwin fan. I know people love him, people hate him. I'm kind of lukewarm, don't really care. A couple of movies he's done I like and that kind of thing. I've never thought of him as, he's not Anthony Hopkins. So I don't expect him to be a perfect actor. And in fact, if he's doing this, I'm impressed. I'm actually more impressed than I recall him being as an actor, because his grief muscle does engage, although lightly. And him putting his hand up could be face blocking because of shame or that mark. We won't really know. I mean, certainly you can tell he feels something about this woman as he's starting to talk about her. It does look like it overtakes him rather than something that he's prepared. I don't see him what I call going down the well. Of course, he is a real actor, not the people we usually see trying to act and lie, who find a way to draw themselves down into a well to start crying. But so it kind of overwhelms him, it looks like. So I think it looks real enough to me, considering I don't typically think of him as that fantastic an actor. Mark, you may have a different opinion. But it's his normal speech pattern, that sales pitch that he always has when he's talking, where he goes up at the end, down when he's telling you, but up at the end. And when he says she was, what word does he use? Admired. Mm-hmm. That word is a sell. That is a big sell. That is a, hey, here's who she is. I also don't see, and the reason I don't think this is really prepared and scripted, I don't see a whole lot of left eye accessing. I see him talking and thinking, and we'll see him as he talks, storytelling in a way that he does as a person. If you've seen him on like late night interviews, when he's storytelling and talking about something, Chase, you call it body narration. He uses his whole body to tell the story, and we're going to see a lot of it. He's using illustrators. His cadence is pretty consistent and that kind of thing. And his cadence even changes when he goes down into this kind of emotional feel. So that's what I got. This early in, I'd say, yeah, okay, could he be acting? Sure. But if he is, it's probably better than most of his work in the past, in my opinion. Chase, what do you got?
So I have an acting friend who is on a bunch of soap operas, like Young and the Restless specifically. And he is one of the stars of Young and the Restless. I called him today.
We know him.
We know him. Figure nice this guy. Out. Yeah, you guys have met him. And I talked to a few other people, and one of the tricks that I've heard from several people today that is used is peppermint extract to make somebody cry. And I think it's interesting in this clip, the upper eyelid goes from normal color to completely red in just about no time. And this is an unusual response for anybody crying. And I think all of us here have talked to people who are in the worst day of their life. And there's only marks. I think this is interesting. There's only marks on the spots where his hand was touching his face. And I think the instantaneous sniffing was not long, in my opinion, not long enough for tears to form. It's more likely to be an irritant or something that, like a peppermint extract, that might have cleared the sinuses. And in this video, there's some grief muscle, but there's a lacking movement right here, which if you ever see somebody in grief or shame, this little chin, it's called the chin boss, this movement kind of moving up right there, is missing for this video. And finally, the side of his nose that his hand was touching, which is his left side of his nose, was red just as well as his eyelids were red. I think that's interesting. Not saying that it absolutely happened, but I think that it's definitely something worth looking into, and it's something worth considering for the video, especially since it's such a pervasive technique that from what I've heard today. Scott, what do you think?
All right. Yeah, I agree with you. So did you do frame by frame for the chin?
No.
Chase? Okay. Because he does get some dimples in there, but man, that comes on pretty quick. The whole crying thing hits him pretty fast. I agree with you there. We see a lot of heavy head illustrators. We're dealing with an actor, so almost everything is dramatic. His head tilts just a little bit when he's trying to say, or tell something serious. His head gets a tilt on it when he starts talking about something that he's trying to point home to validate that statement. There are no tears, a lot of sniffling, but there aren't any tears. And I think the forehead movement and the grief muscle, the reason we're seeing just a little tiny bit, I call it tactical Botox, because he really doesn't look like he's been Botoxed, but man, he has, because you can tell they have been when their eyebrows start dumping down there in the middle. They start like pointing down almost like the evil, whatever it is. And if you look at his eyebrows, I think this is one on his left, goes up and is almost pointing up at looking for Sputnik 1 or something. So he's got that what I call a crash right there in the middle of those heading down. So we do see a little bit, but there's not enough there to be able to tell if it's true grief or not, because it didn't come up with that upside down horseshoe thing. But I agree with you, Greg. It's there, but it's very small. And what's in the chin boss is minimal. Even frame by frame, you have to go through and watch it's minimal. But that thing passes by so fast. I'm sure he may have been holding that up and then boom, it got away from him. But that was mighty quick to be a full-on emotional cry, in my opinion, anyway. Other than that, everything looks normal and as it should in this situation. All right.
The thing I find interesting about grief muscle is it can be so different in different people. We've seen folks who it's really pronounced and folks who it's just like a little arch. Was his name Christopher McDaniel, the guy in Macon, Georgia, with the weird little forehead thing, Scott. So it can be different on different people. And when people cry, it can look very different.
Yeah.
The Ukrainian-born cinematographer quickly gelled with Baldwin.
The people who watched the daily said that her work was beautiful. She was someone who was loved by everyone who worked with and liked by everyone who worked with and admired. Sorry. But admired by everybody who worked with her.
All right. Here we go.
And you were rehearsing that scene. Was it an actual rehearsal? There's some disagreement about that, whether it was a formal rehearsal at that time.
This is a marking rehearsal where I'm going to show her. She's standing next to the camera. She's like this, you or me. She's got a monitor here. The camera is here filming that way. She takes a monitor that is his monitor, the operator, and turns it toward her. It swivels, and she says to me, hold the gun lower. Go to your right. Okay, right there. All right, do that. Now, show it a little bit lower. And she's getting me to position the gun. Everything is in her direction. She's guiding me through how she wants me to hold the gun for this angle. And I draw the gun out, and I find a mark. I draw the gun out, I find a cut. And what's really urgent is the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle.
So if you're shooting directly into the camera lens, you're not aiming.
I'm not shooting into the camera lens. I'm shooting just off.
Just off.
Right, in her direction. I'm holding the gun where she told me to hold it, which ended up being aimed right in below her armpit, was what I was told. I don't know. This was a completely incidental shot, an angle that may not have ended up in the film at all.
All right, Chase, what do you got?
I know you guys are going to cover some of the behaviors in here. I want to cover a couple of the words. And some of the words that are there and some of the words that are missing from this monologue here. He uses the word urgent. So what's really urgent is blah, blah, wasn't meant to be fired at that angle. And then later, he's not using her name in the videos that we've seen so far. So we're on video 2. We're not hearing the victim's name being mentioned at all, which is a strong data point for dissociation from guilt or dissociation, wanting to separate yourself from that person in the eyes of the person that's watching. So keep an eye or maybe an ear on that in the coming videos. Does the name come out? I want you to be listening to see if you hear the name be used in some of the videos that are coming up. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, so when you say words, urgent, I think what he's trying to get out, and I have 2 words written down, urgent and incidental. Urgent and incidental. On the side of the road, when we did his video, he talked about it being an incidental shooting, and I was like, what the hell does that mean? Well, now I understand what he means. It was just a thing. It was not going to be part of the show. So it was an accidental thing, incidental shooting, as he referred to it there. You see his baseline come out again. I mean, this guy is... We've seen him his whole life in front of a camera, so we know his baseline when he's being interviewed is that animated kind of guy, and he's doing that. But he storytells with his whole body. He puts you in the position. He makes you part of the story, and that's who he is. He's just bringing him in. When he says that incidental, I wonder, is that scripted? And the reason it's come up twice is it's something that's in his head. He's been told, hey, this is incidental. It was not intended to be part of the movie, and something went wrong. I don't know, but it comes up twice, so it means something. It's not a word I would typically use all the time, nor would he. And other than that, the only thing I see in terms of scripted is that he's trying to avoid certain words and get certain words out, like that urgent word that meant something to him. It's urgent that you know this, I think is what he means by it, not the thing that is urgent. The other thing is I don't see him accessing left. I don't see him doing any of that kind of stuff, like he's recalling something he's memorized. And then he does it, look off to the right and doing that pulling taffy move as he's trying to get approval from the guy. And then his head drops down to the right. And as he says incidental, his head is shaking no, as if, futility. You see that in him. But all of his arrows are aligned in the story he's telling, which is kind of interesting. One interesting note is when he talks about these dummy rounds, because I'm going to assume most people that watch us may or may not know a thing about guns, and it's okay for us to talk about this. When he talks about dummy rounds, what he means is a round that looks exactly like a regular round. A round is a combination of a cartridge with powder and a cap and a bullet. And the bullet is the thing that goes out the barrel. Whether you know that or not, some of you are going to go, yeah, of course, but some of you don't know. And in a blank, there is no bullet at the end. They put these bullets in the chamber, in the little wheel part of the gun, so that folks like me don't look at it and go, well, you're not shooting anybody with that when they're holding it up to the camera. And so they have these dummies, and it's only as good as how well they build those dummies. I don't know what Hollywood standard is. It could have no cap so you can tell from the back. It could have something else. But if it doesn't, you would have to literally take that round out of that gun and shake it around, pick it up to know the weight difference is the only way you'd be able to tell. So it's really easy for us to assign blame and say he should have checked. But in the kind of gun we're talking about, you would literally, Chase, you'd have to take this little thumb ramrod and push each round out, turn the wheel, take each round out and check it. And so I can understand why if you're using cosmetic or dummy rounds, he personally would not check it every time. And you'll hear a lot of people saying that. I'm not taking his side one way or the other, but I will say there's logic to his discussion here. And I think that's an important part of this to have. Scott, what do you have?
All right. Again, he's an excellent storyteller. He's in dramatic and his thing is stories, is telling stories through film, as they do. So that's why he sets the scene up perfectly. I mean, it's almost like you're there as he describes it. And that's really great. Again, his illustrators are large, and that's what helps do that. They're descriptive illustrators as they go along. Part of the definition of illustrators is not just emphasizing specific words or phrases, but building things in boxes. Chase has a word for it. What's the word you use, Chase?
I use body narration.
Body narration.
Great word. Great term.
Yeah. So they're really, really descriptive. And people communicate in three ways. They when you run into a person who's an auditory person, they'll talk about hearing things and the way things sound. It sounds good to me. That sounds good. Those kind of things. You hear a person who's into the visual communication, like most people are in movies, or people are into movies. When they talk about things, they'll say, "Look like this. Here's what it looks like to me. That brooch she's wearing looks a little heavy," or whatever. And then you have kinesthetic, which is the person who talks about things, how things feel and everything. So he's a visual person. That's why he's always making these big illustrators describing and actually building pictures of these things, which we see he gets more into it here in a few minutes. There's an edit when he said in between, she's getting me and she's getting me to position the gun. Then there's the edit. And then he says everything is in her direction. So I don't know what they got out there, but there's a complete change of scene there. And if you listen to it, you'll hear it. That's what first got me paying attention to it. And then when I watch it, he's a little bit forward, then he's all back, and everything looks different. And you can hear Stephanopoulos say something during that edit, which they've tried to block out, but it came through on the other mic or in the room sound. So after he mimes that pulling the gun thing, he says what's really urgent is, like you guys were saying, he used that the last time we broke his stuff down. He said, it's urgent that you know, or it's urgent that something. So that must be one of his little words he uses all the time. And then when he says the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle, he's smiling, and the smile stays at the end of that. I think this is the first little brick in we're seeing in his wall of, I didn't do it, it's not my fault. In other words, and I'll bet you $100 when it comes to the trial, we'll hear that similar phrase, if not the very same thing. How he talks about how he sets that up the very same way. I know I'm under the impression that's going to happen. And after the next question, his posture is perfect. Everything straightens up. Oops, and he's sitting like this, and he looks pro. He looks like everything. He looks confident and all that. And he says, "I'm holding the gun where she told me to hold it." Again, there's brick 2 as he starts building this little wall of it's not me. I was a victim here as well. And I agree with it. It bugs me he doesn't say her name so far. He hasn't said her name up to this point so far. All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree. That smile comes, and I think we've seen it before in other work of his that or interviews or roadside stops that we've looked at. That smile comes when he believes somebody else has made a mistake. And I do believe we see it there, and we will see it later on. So I totally agree with that. What I would say, like you said, Scott, he is a very good mime. I know people like it when I break down words. Mime, from the Latin mimosis, to copy. So he's very good at copying stuff and doing what we call illusionary mime, which is to create the illusion of something that's there that isn't actually physical. So he's great at going, hey, you're me. She's looking at the monitor like this. He's very clear about cocking, the gun back here and later on as well. So very definite. Look, as an actor, one of the things you need to be able to do, especially in film, is hit your mark exactly. And time again, get props, get items, get your face, get your hand exactly where the director of photography wants your face and your hands, because they're trying to create the most beautiful picture possible. So you have to be able to do that time and time again. So we should expect his mime, his geography of this story to be spot on, and we should expect that it doesn't change at any point, and I believe it is spot on. I believe we see him describe this very, very, very clearly, and he says with downward intonation, I'm not shooting at the camera lens, okay? And he's mapped that out as well. He's very clear tonally that he isn't shooting at the camera lens, and he's already mapped that out for us. And when he says that as well, his hands are on his knees. There's no adapters. There's no self-soothers. So I think, the biggest thing I take from this particular piece of footage here is this is what he looks like when he's telling you the truth. Okay, this is what he looks like when he's very, very clear of exactly what happened. And then there's that slight upturn of the mouth there and slight smile of this is what he looks like as well when he thinks somebody else has done something wrong. And he also does start to set up in his narrative there that he was under the control or under the orders of the director of photography as well. So he's already started to shift, I think, as Chase might say, that kind of locus of control away from him and towards somebody else. So interesting second film there. That's what I got for you.
And Scott, I think to your point, when there's the edit there, I think he was asked a present tense question to put him in the present moment, because he switches to past tense to present. So I am, or she's doing this to me. So those are all present.
Okay.
So I think the question that Stephanopoulos asked him was something, okay, so you're here and you're doing this. So what's happening now? So a question to kind of put him in present and get him to describe the scene better. I think that's what was edited out.
Yeah.
And you were rehearsing that scene. Was it an actual rehearsal? There's some disagreement about that, whether it was a formal rehearsal at that time.
This is a marking rehearsal where I'm going to show her. She's standing next to the camera. She's like this. You're me. She's got a monitor here. The camera is here filming that way. She takes a monitor that is his monitor, the operator, and turns it toward her. It swivels, and she says to me, hold the gun lower. Go to your right. Okay, right there. All right, do that. Now, show it a little bit lower. And she's getting me to position the gun. Everything is in her direction. She's guiding me through how she wants me to hold the gun for this angle. And I draw the gun out, and I find a mark. I draw the gun out, I find a cut. And what's really urgent is the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle.
So if you're shooting directly into the camera lens, you're not aiming.
I'm not shooting into the camera lens. I'm shooting just off.
Just off.
Right, in her direction. I'm holding the gun where she told me to hold it, which ended up being aimed right in below her armpit. It was what I was told, I don't know. This was a completely incidental shot, an angle that may not have ended up in the film at all.
Yeah.
But we kept doing this, and so then I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. And I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off. I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
At the moment. The decisive
That was the moment the gun went off, yeah. That was the moment the gun went off.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them. Never. That was the training that I had. You don't point a gun at me and pull the trigger. On day one, of my instruction in this business, people said to me, never take a gun and go click, 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 because even though it's incremental, you damage the firing pin on the gun if you do that. Don't do that.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
So here now I start to see him delivering his story. If you don't believe he has something he wants to get out, whether it's a scripted story or, as you put it, Scott, building a wall, when he hits points he wants to get across, he double states every one of those key points. And if you can look for it when he says things like, I did not point at her, I would not point at her, I would never point and pull the trigger. The interesting piece for me, so go back and listen and you'll hear 3 different places. Go back and listen to the 3 different places. He doubles the statement. Never, never. And then he looks away when he's telling his story and when he's showing how he cocked the gun and all those kinds of things. No eye contact at all. When he starts to make real eye contact is when he's talking about, well, my training, boom, 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 and he's pulling his finger like he's firing a trigger. He makes good eye contact. So I think it's important to him to get across the meaning of what matters. And then when there's something that's throwaway, for example, this gun training from his first time, that pull the trigger, pull the trigger, pull the trigger, then he makes good eye contact. So interesting that he's trying to get across content, that he is double telling certain points, and he shows distaste or disdain or something right after that. That was the training I had. That kind of half-faced, draw back the side of the face, something's going on in his head there. Here's the thing. We can see what's going on. We can't tell you what is causing it, what inside his brain is causing that. It could be something internal, that he's disappointed in himself, that he has something to do with that. It could be that he is pissed at Stephanopoulos because he asked him a hard question that he was not ready for. It could be the situation, the entire situation. We can't tell that. We can see the symptoms. We can't tell the cause. And that's, we always say, we don't read minds. As much as Scott's friends think we're in the mind reading business, we're actually looking for symptoms and we try to figure it out from there. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with you. We're still not seeing a mention of the victim's name, which is a data point here, especially during these heated, intense moments. We're not seeing that stuff. But we're seeing a ton of repetition. And as a behavioral expert, if I'm ever talking about brainwashing or this mind control stuff and how to control people's thoughts, if I could sum it all up in one word, it would be repetition. And there is a ton of repetition here. He's saying, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? We got 3 times. He says, I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off. That's twice repeated. And that was the moment the gun went off. Repeated twice again. Trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger. You don't pull the trigger. I would never pull the trigger. Then he says, click, 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 over and over again. So there's tons of repetition here that I have never once in my life of analyzing video and interrogations and all kinds of videos. I've never seen statements like this with this much repetition inside the statement. Typically, when I see lots of repetition, there was probably a bullet list that an attorney provided to that person, or there was a bulletized list with some very, very key data points that need to be hammered down. So the person by default starts to repeat those things. And he's saying you never point a gun at somebody. The entire point of having guns in movie sets, 90% of the time, is to point them at somebody and then pull the trigger. So when we say like this weapon safety laws would have stopped everything, maybe not, because a lot of times in the movies, that's the purpose of having the gun there. There's gunfights and guns are being pointed at people. There's a lack of emotion throughout this. There's a lack of emotion throughout speaking about the event on the face, and this is scientifically proven in peer-reviewed journals all over the world that we have facial expressions that are pretty much universal, and we're not seeing hardly any of that throughout this. And there's a lack of hesitancy here, which is unusual for a person who's just gone through something traumatic. This is their first big TV appearance to talk about everything. We would typically see some hesitation here, some stopping to think, which we will see in a future video. But it's very on message here. So we're seeing a lot of maybe not, I won't say scripted because the whole thing's titled unscripted, but there's some rehearsal. I'll say that.
Prepared content.
Yeah, prepared content. Mark.
Yeah, so I agree that repetition of those words, is it PR message? That's a possibility. Is it self-soothing? This is a stress point for him, and so the repetition is around self-soothing. Could be that. Is it even maybe that he isn't getting the response that he wants from the interviewer? You know, I pulled it back, I let it go, and that's when the gun went off. Maybe he was expecting the interviewer to go, oh, that's when the gun went off. Right. So you didn't pull the trigger. No, I never pulled the. Oh, so you didn't pull the trigger. I think he might be expecting a moment of revelation in the audience and the interviewer, and he doesn't get that back. And so he repeats again, like, this is the moment where you suddenly realize I'm not culpable. This is an accident. I don't know which one of those it is. Possibly it's all of the above. I'm not quite sure, or some of one and some of the other. But it is interesting. Greg, I get it as well. The disdain on, you don't point a gun at someone and pull the trigger. That's for me when I see the disdain. Now, disdain or contempt, it tends to be a social thing. It tends to be that somebody has done something wrong. And just as Greg said, it can be internal or external. I did something against the group, or somebody else did something against the group. So is it that, look, he really should have known not to just half cock and let go of it, should have known that, and so it's disdain against himself, or somebody should have checked the gun more thoroughly, it's disdain against the other person. But ultimately, that we see disdain, that means a social rule has been broken. And he says, look, first day I was taught this. So like, this is, he goes back to his initiation within the group and says, this is the thing that you never ever break, and somebody somewhere has broken the rules of our group. But again, let's just lastly go back to the geography of this. We see that the finger is straight. He's telling us, I don't have my finger on the trigger there. You know, so the geography makes a lot of sense, and he's a good mime, and he should be able to reproduce exactly what's going on. So I buy a lot of what he's saying there. I'm interested in the repetition, just as everybody else is. Scott, what do you got?
All right. After he describes up to the point of the discharge, after he talks about all the moments coming up to that, everything changes. He starts talking a little bit quieter. He gets really still, as you would, because you're coming up on something pretty heavy. And then we haven't seen that up to this point, obviously. And I think the disdain and stuff you guys are talking about, that contempt, I don't think that's what it is. When you look at Trump, and Greg pointed this out, he does a sniff thing. Every time he makes a point or he scores something, he does this. And it's kind of Barney Fife-esque is the idea I got from that. And I did the thing where I slowed it down, sped it up, slowed it down. There is no sniff there, but I think that's what that is. That's what it looks like to me, and that's what we're all about. What it looked like to each one of us. So I think what we're seeing is him just going like that. I don't think it's disdain. It could be Mark, because I started thinking about that when you said that, because when I first saw it, I said, and Amber actually pointed out to me, she said, look at that. And I was like, yeah. But it's a tough call on that, but I think it's more of counting things that he's scored on. Because at that point, what he's talking about there, again, is gonna come up in his court case against a little brick to put up for his wall. He's got a pretty good foundation for it so far. All right, that's what I got. You good?
Hey, one quick note. I wondered about that, Scott. The only reason I didn't think that is because, Mark, what you said about him repeating, I wondered if he was insecure as a reason he's repeating. And then I thought, well, he didn't win. He doesn't look like he's winning to me. So I had the same thought about the Trump thing. I thought maybe he's just doing something like that. But yeah, I think he's insecure in this video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough call on that one.
But we kept doing this, and so then I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. And I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun, and the gun goes off. I let go of the hammer of the gun, and the gun goes off.
At the moment. The decisive
that was the moment the gun went off, yeah. That was the moment the gun went off.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never. That was the training that I had. You don't point a gun at me and pull the trigger. On day one, of my instruction in this business, people said to me, never take a gun and go click, 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 because even though it's incremental, you damage the firing pin on the gun if you do that. Don't do that.
Right.
So you have this Colt 45, you just pulled...
The hammer as far back as I go without cocking the actual
And you're holding on to the hammer.
I'm holding that. I'm just showing. I go, how about that? Does that work? You see that? Do you see that? She goes, yeah, that's good. I let go of the hammer. Bang, the gun goes off. Everyone is horrified. They're shocked. It's loud. They don't have their earplugs in. No one was. The gun was supposed to be empty. I was told I was handed an empty gun. If there were cosmetic rounds, nothing with a charge at all, a flash round, nothing. She goes down. I thought to myself, did she faint?
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so I see a lot of whole body illustration again, and then really over the top, bang. I mean, he looks excited in a way. If I shot someone, I probably would go and then bang, but who knows? I mean, he's a storyteller. That's what he does. The only time he makes eye contact and is focused on Stephanopoulos is when he's not giving details. Is that something that he's been coached? Don't know. Is it just instinctive for him not to look him in the eyes when he's talking about something that's this big a deal? I can't tell you that. I can tell you he does not look Stephanopoulos in the eyes when he's working through details. That might mean he's trying to remember something. He's trying to remember the details as tightly and accurately as he can. But he does a lot of downright eye accessing. And I know, you guys are not on the same plate I am exactly about eye movement, but downright eye accessing is about as close to a universal as I go. Most everybody, when they're thinking about something emotional, is going to go drop down into their right. He does a lot of that. And then you can see he's trying to sync with him. He'll turn his head to him a little, and he's trying to sync with him and get some approval. And then when he's talking about the gun was supposed to be empty, he turns his head to a different location than he's had to now and kind of does that drawing with his eyes for acceptance. He's doing an oblique angle as he's talking to him. Then he goes downright, as I was told. His illustrators sync, and then his face goes to some kind of confusion or something going on with him when I wondered, did she faint? So there's something going on in his head here. I think those are real feelings, and I don't think this is, if he were trying to project powerful emotion, it wouldn't look like that. Confusion would probably not be the emotion he came up with. He would come up with sorrow or grief or something like that. So I don't think that part's scripted. I think he's telling the truth, how he felt, what he saw, and that's what I got. Scott, what do you have?
All right. Now he's all worked up and excited real big. So he's his cadence speeds up again, and his fake finger gun comes up a little bit higher as well. Now, let me ask you guys this. When we're explaining something for shooting a gun, do you do this? Or do you do this? Or do you do this?
I do the grip.
So it would look like that.
I do the grip.
Your finger would be...
Or that,
Yeah. So that's really odd. It doesn't look like I don't think he's around as many guns as he's coming on like he is. I don't think he's familiar with actually going out and shooting them. So good or bad,
maybe just on set. And we don't think of a gun as something for set. We're thinking about bracing because of impact and shooting is part of the reason why.
Yeah, so he starts talking even faster, and then especially when he says, "I was told I was handed an empty gun," that's speeding up there. That's understandable because he's excited about this at this point. Then he said, "She goes down." I thought to myself, "Did she faint?" Let me ask you something. If we're in a room and you hear a gunshot and you see somebody on the floor, two people, one guy's screaming, and one girl on the floor, a woman on the floor, are you going to say, "I wonder if she fainted"? No. You're not gonna wonder if she fainted. You're gonna know exactly what happened. You're gonna know exactly what happened at that point. So this is where he starts getting a little bit on my nerves when he starts down this road. And I'll leave it there. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, on that exact moment, Scott, I get an asymmetrical turn up of the mouth. It's not enough for me to go, that's Duper's delight. I don't think it's that. It's not enough for me to go, it's disgust or disdain, but something is odd about that. Something's odd about that moment. I agree. If there's a bang, there's a gun and there's a bang and somebody falls over, the first thing I would worry is something's loaded. Somebody's been shot. That's not somebody fainting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, look how clear he is about bang, the gun goes off and he does this strike, this out gesture. You're out gesture. So really, really emphatic at that point. Again, this is the body language of a storyteller, a good mime who's telling you exactly what went on. No doubts about it on that. Then very interesting for me, later on, he does this lean forward and side into the face. It might be that side on the camera, can't remember. But essentially, he's doing the mime of just talking into the interviewer's ear because he wants to then say something quite intimate to him. It's this idea of, let me tell you something, just between you and me. The gun was supposed to be empty. The gun was supposed to be empty. And then we see what I talked about before, that what I would call that righteous smile from him of, look, this is between you and me. This is somebody else's fault. I'm not culpable on this. Now, look, eventually courts will decide that. But ultimately, I think, he has a very fixed idea at the moment that somebody else is culpable and between you and me, he should let people know that. A little bit secretly, a little bit covertly, just so we all know. Let's not shout it out loud, but let's just say it quietly. That's all I got on that one. Are we all done? Chase?
No regulators there, yeah.
All right. Let me go again. Chase?
I'm gonna keep
What do you got? No, of course you are. Of course you are. But I want people to see. I want people to see how it could have been. How it could have been. I want them to see just how this panelist is what a great handover looks like. Okay. And that's all I've got on that one. Chase,
Scott should have done it.
What do you got? Oh, you talked over my handover. I'm going to have to do
Everybody
it again.
looks serious. Everybody looks like we're really
you're all
into
talking over my handover. Quiet, please. Quiet on the set. Quiet on the set. Okay. And that's all I've got on that one. Chase, what do you got?
Thanks for being so professional, Mark.
Thank you.
Start off by saying there's more repetition here. There's more repetition just like last time, and there's more repetition here, if you didn't see that yet. But I want you to think just of the person we're looking at, not as a normal person. This is almost an outlier type of person, which is when we typically see outlier behaviors. But one of the things we're hearing at the beginning of this is him telling us this almost like he's reading a screenplay. And please keep in mind, this guy probably reads screenplays for a living. He probably gets 50 of them shipped to his house every day. But he's saying everyone's horrified. They are shocked. It is loud. They don't have their earplugs. This is straight out of third-person POV from fiction. This is straight third-person POV out of a screenplay. So, again, we're not hearing a name. We're not hearing the name of the actual victim here. And when he talks about her going down, there's just this simple jerk of the hand. It's really abrupt. There's not a whole lot of emotion right here. And I think a person like this might not be communicating the emotion because we're not at the emotional part of the screenplay. We're not at the emotional part of the story yet. And I'm not saying that that's a deceptive behavior. I'm saying this is how this person's psychology most likely works. I'm willing to bet that he is honest, and this is a truthful recollection for the most part that we're seeing here. That's all I got.
So you have this Colt 45. You just pulled
the hammer as far back as I could without cocking the actual
and you're holding on to the hammer.
I'm holding that. I'm just showing her. I go, how about that? Does that work? You see that? Do you see that? She goes, yeah, that's good. I let go of the hammer. Bang, the gun goes off. Everyone is horrified. They're shocked. It's loud. They don't have their earplugs in. No one was. The gun was supposed to be empty. I was told I was handed an empty gun. If there were cosmetic rounds, nothing with a charge at all, a flash round, nothing. She goes down. I thought to myself, did she faint?
All right.
Good.
Within 15 minutes or 20 minutes after that, the police arrived and took the church set and put the crime tape around it, the yellow tape, and forced us all to the perimeters of the parking area where we sat and waited. She was in the church, and she was not taken out of the church for quite a while.
In the aftermath, there was chaos and confusion. But nobody told you what happened?
No. It wasn't until I was in the police station. Hours later, I mean, it was like seeing aliens. It was utter disbelief over the idea. It was unacceptable, the idea that it was a live round. And finally, one of the police officers, at the conclusion of my interview, I was there for like an hour and a half or so, she takes her phone and she slides it across to me. She says, "That's what came out of Joel's shoulder. A .45 caliber slug. It was a real bullet."
Had you known that Joel had been hit?
No one had any idea until that police officer, that sheriff's officer, said to me, "This is the slug, .45 caliber slug they took out of Joel's arm." And then the kind of insanity-inducing agony of thinking that someone put a live bullet in the gun.
I'll go first on this one. Again, really large illustrator setting up the scene. And when he scratches his head, that's ventilation a lot of times. You'll see somebody who is wondering about stuff, or they're getting heated up about something, they're getting worried, you'll see him do that. He's got some hair, so he does that. But at the same time, it could be him scratching his head and just sort of pushing on, almost as an adapter, or almost like he's not unsure of what's happening there or what he's saying. And when he says, "But nobody told you," when the interviewer says, "Nobody told you what happened," no, that's really fast and really loud. And it wasn't until I was at the police station hours later that he knew that he knew anything like that happened. If I had heard somebody get shot again, and there's a woman laying on the floor, and there's a guy laying back there screaming because he's been shot in the shoulder, you're going to know what happened. This is starting to sound like this is starting to sound deceptive, because what he does is he moves himself away from him. So you didn't know the other guy got hit? He doesn't say, no, I didn't. He keeps talking. We didn't know this until the police officer did this. So, hours later or whatever, however long ago it was later. This to me these are bells and whistles right here. He's being really careful about what he's saying. This is not, it may be unscripted, but he had the answers, the questions given to him earlier, because he's ready for that as he goes through. And this guy isn't coming on hard. There's no reason for him to come on, tough with him, because we know he didn't do it on purpose, or I would assume he didn't do it on purpose. That seems obvious. But that's deceptive behavior right there. That's what puts him in that category of look out and that thing. I'll stop there. I know I'm humming around the same thing every time, but man, this looks deceptive to me. All right, Chase, what do you got?
There is a huge chunk of missing information here. We already know from his appearance when the media stopped him on the side of the road, he's comfortable saying what he can't talk about and what he can. We've already established his comfort level with telling the media that he can't talk about something. But there's still something missing. If you shoot a person and 15 minutes goes by before police force you out of a building, no one needs to tell you what happened. If you're in the room long enough for 911 to be called, you know what happened. If you shoot someone and they bleed, you know what happened. The narrative here seems to be that he just vanished from the building immediately after the gun went off, and people on the scene who he was sequestered with would have seen the bullet holes, would have seen some kind of wound. So this is we're at the point of criticizing story and not necessarily behavior here, but this is all what we do. We're interrogators. We talk to people for a living. This would be a gigantic missing black hole in the story where everything's falling apart. But obviously, I think this was an accident. And once we get to our final thoughts, I think you're going to be surprised a little bit. But that's all I got. I'll leave it at that. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, pretty simply, there are a couple of things. If you shoot somebody tomorrow, there's going to be all kinds of things go through your head. You're going to hedge. And if you're in this situation where you happen to be a producer and you happen to be the actor who pulled the trigger and you're going to have some stone walls around things that you should and shouldn't talk about. So, of course, we're going to see deceptive body language. We're going to see him trying. Remember, deception doesn't mean lying. It can sometimes mean omitting information, and you're dancing around the topic when somebody gets close to it. And I think we're seeing some of that. Scott, I think when he does this, it's more than a simple comforter. When people feel high stress, often you'll see them grip and rub the back of their head. And I think when he puts his hand up there, that's pretty damn pronounced. For all the rest of his body language, just pretty damn pronounced. I think he realizes we're getting awfully close to some of those areas. I need to be careful. And that's what I think we're seeing is when he starts to repeat, it's because he's uncertain. We're not seeing a whole lot of that. He is going down right. He's navigating whatever's going on. His eyes widen at it was a real bullet. That actually, I think, is real for him. I don't think his eyes intentionally did it. I think that's an autonomic response to what his brain is doing. If somebody scripted this message for him, he needs to hire somebody else because nobody says no one had any idea until. I think that's his brain trying to craft the sentence to say, we didn't know what really happened. But Chase, I'm with you. If you shoot somebody tomorrow with a .45 long Colt at 5 to 10 feet away, you know what happened. You certainly know. Anything that's lethal is going to, the cavitation from that round is going to make a hell of a mess out of a person. And you won't be able to forget it when that happens. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have all that in his head and all those visuals, but has been told, shut up, don't say a word. Don't know. I'm just saying if he were in that situation, right. If my friend were in that situation and said, hey, this happened, I'd say, don't talk at all about details about what you know. Just be quiet. And I'm sure his lawyers have already said it. He also says, when he says no one had any idea until, that's blame sharing. So he feels some responsibility, certainly. Whether he should or not, that's a different equation. I think anybody who shoots somebody is going to feel that. And I think as we get to that blame sharing, we're starting to use team pronouns, as you would call them, Chase. I always just call it blame sharing when it's me that pulled the trigger. I want other people involved. No one had any idea until. I think he's working and navigating through here, and that's what you're seeing is deception, I think. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree. For somebody who is so good at using the descriptors and using the mime to tell us the story and tells a good verbal story, we've got the gap in the story now. We do get some really good geography of, look, the tape went around the church. So really good geography, really good mime of that. But where is the mime of, and then, Hutchins falls to the floor. I run over. I'm doing this. Somebody over there is grabbing there. There's nothing of that description. Yeah, I'm with everybody else. Why? Why are we not talking about that? Why don't we get some good storytelling around that? And I think, everybody could be right there around, well, that's the one thing you're not going to hear about because culpability or not acting quick enough or not taking control, not being a good leader in that situation may well come up. I just don't know. I'm speculating, of course, around that. What is most interesting for me is how he does transference of power into objects. And I think it might be a little bit of a redirect there, Greg, a little bit of chaff and redirect in that he picks up this book, and don't you as an audience go, what's he picking up? What's he doing? What's he doing? He goes, well, this is an iPhone. All right, you've just made a book into an iPhone. And what it is the representation of a bullet because she had the bullet on it, and then he puts it down on the table and he kind of puts it at cursory, slides it over. I think what he's doing there, number one, is a bit of a redirect of look at my storytelling, look at my mime, because it is quite extraordinary. And then he's showing how the police blindside him and are cursory about it. So there's a bit of blame shift there, or certainly a bit of, look, negative people doing negative things over here. Don't look over here, look over here. So extraordinary. And again, control elsewhere. All the control is, I knew nothing about this. I was blindsided by this book being an iPad, being a bullet. Quite extraordinary and missing data there. That's what I got on that one.
Nice.
Sorry. Within 15 minutes or 20 minutes after that, the police arrived and took the church set and put the crime tape around it, the yellow tape, and forced us all to the perimeters of the parking area where we sat and waited. She was in the church, and she was not taken out of the church for quite a while.
In the aftermath, there was chaos and confusion. But nobody told you what happened?
No. It wasn't until I was in the police station. Hours later, I mean, it was like seeing aliens. It was utter disbelief over the idea. It was unacceptable, the idea that it was a live round. And finally, one of the police officers, at the conclusion of my interview, I was there for like an hour and a half or so, she takes her phone and she slides it across to me. She says, "That's what came out of Joel's shoulder, a .45 caliber slug. It was a real bullet."
Had you known that Joel had been hit?
No one had any idea until that police officer, that sheriff's officer, said to me, "This is the slug, .45 caliber slug they took out of Joel's arm." And then the kind of insanity-inducing agony of thinking that someone put a live bullet in the gun.
All right, let's go to the next one.
The notion that there was a live round in that gun did not dawn on me till probably 45 minutes to an hour later.
45 minutes to an hour.
Well, she's laying there and I go, did she get hit by wadding? Was there a blank? Sometimes those blank rounds have a wadding inside that packs, it's like a cloth that packs the gunpowder in. Sometimes wadding comes out and can hit people and it can feel like a little bit of a poke. But no one could understand, did she have a heart attack? Because remember, the idea that someone put a live bullet in the gun was not even in reality.
Did you go up to her? Did you back away?
I went up to her and then we were told to get out of the building. We were forced to get out of the building. The medics came in. I mean, I stood over her for 60 seconds and she just lay there kind of in shock.
Was she conscious?
My recollection is yes.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
So this is the only time we see him change dramatically from his baseline. He's got this passionate, over-enunciated kind of New Yorker thing going on, and suddenly he goes, and stammers. He now is in trouble. This is a place where he's been told something, I guarantee you. I mean, there's rarely a time you hear me say, this is a fact. This I would almost guarantee is a fact. He has eye accessing to his left pretty hard, which you would say 3 o'clock. I typically associate with something I'm recalling I've heard. And he goes, my recollection is yes. Well, there's distancing from the answer. His blink rate actually increases here, and he does a short, nervous nod. It's an odd out of everything that we see. It's out of baseline. And I think it's a danger zone for him. Somebody's told him to be very careful, not to be passionate around this, not to talk about it. And then you also see a little disapproval or sadness as the sides of his mouth draw down. It's out of standard. So this is a place I think he's been coached, and the coaching is actually showing. Scott, what do you got? Or Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, I totally agree. We get a nose wrinkle from him, very slight, on when he talks about 60 seconds. So again, I'm concerned about that 60 seconds. I'm like, how accurate is that? I'm concerned now. The story's getting fuzzy for me a little bit. It seems to be getting fuzzy for him. It's getting fuzzy for me. I'm not seeing the same mime happening. I'm not seeing the same emphatic use of detail. Just as you said there, Greg, conscious, my recollection, that's out of baseline. I totally agree. So however, look, is it that, my expectation is when a gun goes off, when there's a loud bang, and all hell breaks loose, you can forget things. We all know that when you're fuzzy on the detail, before you might remember, but after that gun goes off, maybe it gets a bit fuzzy. So we don't want to discount that. But for somebody who is so accurate and detailed, this is off baseline for me. Scott, what do you think of that one?
All right. You're right about that nose part during the 60 seconds, something's up there because we get a full on, and I think you blinked, Mark, halfway through that because it isn't just a little wrinkle. It's a full on anger micro expression.
Really?
Oh yeah. Because I was going through frame by frame, and I'll show it to you. It is unbelievable when you see it. If you didn't catch it before, you're gonna go, oh my God, that's unbelievable. When he says no one could understand, did she have a heart attack? None of this sounds like it went down the way it supposedly went down. We were forced out of the building. And he said he stood over for 60 seconds. Then they were forced out of the building. Right? Well, keep in mind, he's the guy in charge. It's his movie. He's the star. He's a producer. And with an attitude, with an ego like that, you think he's going to let somebody force us out of the building? No, he'd want to stay. And how long does he say it takes for the cops to get there and the ambulance to get there? 15, 20 minutes. So he wasn't sitting there for 60 seconds over. I bet he said something went squirmy in there on him. Something happened in there because he's angry about whatever it was. So I think that's why there's something up there. It'll come out in hopefully in court, but that's my opinion. Doesn't mean it actually did. I could completely be wrong. But I think something happened in there and he's trying to push away from that. And because he looks braced and he's defensive during this as well. Another thing when he says, I stood there for 60 seconds. I'll go back to my thing where I won't go on. You guys covered a lot of that. I think there's something up in that 60 seconds there. I don't think that went down the way he said it went down. And I think there's something goofy in there. I think we'll see that later on. Chase, what do you got?
The bullets that were in this gun, if you're not familiar with a lot of guns, they're called the 45 long Colt. It's a 45 caliber bullet. It's about that long. It's about as big around as my pinky. And if you're standing over a person with a hole in them this size, there is going to be blood. There's going to be pain. There's going to be probably a loss of consciousness to some degree, no matter where the bullet hole is. And especially if you do it for 60 seconds, maybe longer. And suddenly the only thing that he needs to qualify, or what we call an exclusion statement, when we hear politicians all the time say, to the best of my knowledge, as I recall, to my recollection, those kind of exclusion statements, is her level of consciousness. It's the only time we hear an exclusion used throughout this entire thing is due to her level of consciousness here after the incident happened, which I think is a big red flag. And this is after he's saying they were immediately forced out of the building. And this comment about her being conscious, I think, is a huge baseline deviation for Baldwin to begin with. His eyes are recalling standing over her at 9 o'clock to our 9 o'clock a couple of times. And was she conscious? We hear the interviewer ask, and he says only and we hear this long the only time that he uses these kind of filler words there. And the only qualifier, there's no eye movement during the recall for the question. There is a complete body freeze during the initial processing as he starts to answer. And there is a nod for agreement as he's saying, to my recollection. He is trying to get a nod from the interviewer. And I would say it was probably an accident. This is likely deceptive, or it's likely concealing based on something he's heard from legal counsel. That's all I got.
Yeah, guys, a couple things to think about. Remember the first time you ever fired a firearm without earplugs? Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Holy, I mean, you're back on especially this gun. That's a lot of powder coming out, all the stuff that's going to go, the impact to this person, the sounds, the smells, all that stuff that if you've never been around firearms, and if you've never been around someone shot, all that stuff together, it creates this whirl of things going on around you that I can understand how you can't remember facts. And anybody told me 60 seconds, I'd go, yeah, it probably isn't that, even if they're being truthful with me, because your brain goes into a different gear when that kind of stuff happens. Just that sound alone is enough. But then you're right. This person's going to be screaming. That person's going to be screaming. You may not hear it. They may be in and out. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Somebody any of that is.
And somebody in that group, somebody would have said, somebody out of all the people in that room would have said, oh my God, she's been shot. Or do you think she could have been shot? Or would have said to him, did you shoot her?
Yeah. Yep.
Or when you step outside, when somebody gets shot and the idea doesn't pop into his head, come on, man.
Well, when they call 911, they said someone has been shot.
Yeah.
Was it a real bullet? It was you can listen to the 911 call. You can play it over here, Scott, because they mention it. I think we're all on the same page. Anything he's hiding here, I think he's hiding out of protection, not in his, he's hedging because of that.
First time I ever shot a gun and I didn't have earplugs in, I didn't hear anything. All I heard was this. I just went.
Yeah,
all I heard
exactly.
was a whistle.
Yeah.
It scared me to death. I was like,
you ever shot a gun in a car You ever shot a gun in a car?
No.
Holy
no,
man.
no.
The first time you do that, it doesn't matter if you have hearing protection.
Well, after I did it, my brother's like, everybody, I was like, what? It was weird.
The notion that there was a live round in that gun did not dawn on me till probably 45 minutes to an hour later.
45 minutes to an hour.
Well, she's laying there and I go, did she get it by wadding? Was there a blank? Sometimes those blank rounds have a wadding inside that packs, it's like a cloth that packs the gunpowder in. Sometimes wadding comes out and can hit people and it can feel like a little bit of a poke. But no one could understand, did she have a heart attack? Because remember, the idea that someone put a live bullet in the gun was not even in reality.
Did you go up to her? Did you back away?
I went up to her and then we were told to get out of the building. We were forced to get out of the building. The medics came in. I mean, I stood over her for 60 seconds and she just lay there kind of in shock.
Was she conscious?
My recollection is yes.
We've all seen that picture of you off the set in that hour or so after the gun went off. What were you doing? What was going through your mind?
At the end of, she was laying there, and she was there for a while. I was amazed at how long they didn't get her in a car and get her out, but they waited and a helicopter came. And by the time the helicopter took off with her and literally lifted off, we were all glued to that process outside. When she finally left, I don't know how long it was. She was there 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It seemed like a very long time. But they kept saying, well, she's stable. Like nobody, just as you disbelieved that there was a live round in the gun, you disbelieved that this was going to be a fatal accident.
So you didn't know exactly how serious it was?
At the very end of my interview with the sheriff's department, they said to me, we regret to tell you that she didn't make it, she died. They told me right then and there. And that's when I went in the parking lot and called my wife to talk to my wife.
Okay, Mark, what do you got?
So the question there is, what was going through your mind? Pretty clear question. What was going through your mind? And Chatham redirect, I think, blame shift as well. It's amazing how long they didn't get her into a car. Seemed like a very long time. So who are they? Like, can we know who they are? Who they are? Where were you when they were doing this thing that you seem to have no control over? So I'm confused about that, and you're not answering the question. And when you do get to an idea of something that goes through somebody's mind, it's you disbelieve, not I was in disbelief. You disbelieve, not I felt disbelief. So he doesn't at any point take ownership of any feeling or emotion or state of mind or mindset, and doesn't answer the question, what was going through your mind? And that is interesting. I think that he wants to avoid that. Chase, what do you think on that one?
Right as the question is asked at the beginning, there is lip retraction. And when somebody pulls their lips into their mouth, once it passes the barrier of the teeth, just kind of goes into the teeth, most of the time that suggests that there is a need for reassurance. And we see that as the question is being asked. And then he says that we're glued to this process, this thing that's happening, which I think is an unusual way of saying we were terrified, worried, scared, in anguish or agony or panic. And then Mark, just like you said, completely agree, shifts all the pronouns to you for a short period to, I think, A, subconsciously we say this to get other people to agree with us, but I think B, we're doing this to get this agreement away from myself. Everybody else agrees to this. Everybody can get on board with this idea. I think it's important here that we note there's not a lot of emotion. There's no behavior of emotion on the face. This is proven science, and you can take a look at that. But there's no discussion.
It sounds like you're describing Greg. Sorry, dude. I was looking at it while you were doing that. It's just
I'm just listening.
That depends on what you ask Greg about.
That's true. That's true. Sorry,
if
man.
I'm asking Greg about a time he accidentally hurt somebody really bad,
Oh, yeah.
you're going to see emotion, even if it was 15 years ago.
Yep.
Unless he did it on purpose, which he was paid to do. But wrapping this up, there's no discussion of feeling or how he reacted or how he felt about any of these events, which I think is stunning to me, especially being such a good storyteller, a wonderful actor, knowing what a good story structure looks like, reading all of these screenplays all the time through his life. This is how you snag somebody's focus and attention. This is how you capture their emotion, and this is how you lead it down a certain path. I'm surprised it wasn't here. And I think that there may have been a attorney, some kind of attorney or legal counsel saying you will not speak about any of these things. Don't talk about feeling bad or don't talk about feeling guilty. Like you look on the back of your insurance card, it says that. Don't admit any fault if you get into any accident at any time. Let us handle that stuff. And that's he heard probably an advanced version of the back of your insurance card. Scott, what did you think?
Yeah, this whole thing looks squirrely to me. I think he's watching what he says. He wants to come out and say something. Obviously, from a societal point of view, he sort of has to do something. So this is perfect for that. We all expect it. And I think coming into that, when we're seeing that lip compression, I think that might have been from something else because it's already going when he shows up. So maybe he was asking him something at that point. So that's because I looked at that too. And I thought, I don't know what's going on there. So that bugged me a little bit. So I think that might be what was going on, something beforehand. But still, it coincides with what's being asked. So shoot, you never knew something like that he was asking. Anyway, everything. I mean, this is one of the only times we see an adapter when he squeezes his knee. He's sitting in his chair like this, and he's all straight, very still. I don't know. You guys have covered this. I'm not going to go back over and make it boring. This doesn't sound the way it should to me. And that's why I'm not focusing on all the body language right now. I'm going back in interrogator mode because I'd be asking so many questions at this point. Greg, what do you think?
Well, first of all, the guy is the producer for the show. He has a legal obligation. All the insurance, all of that stuff is tied to the producers, not the director. The director's about the artistic piece. The producer's the business piece. So if you bring in a guy and you start asking him questions about what he felt, and let's assume for a minute he has feelings that 911 was too slow, that she died because the helicopter took forever, and he talks about that, or that somebody else caused a problem, and. He can't say that. I mean, the guy is held up to a standard that anybody else on the set would get away with saying something. It's kind of like if you're at corporate America and you're in the leadership team, other people can say, yeah, well, we caused that. You can't. And you get in positions where you have to hold back information. I think that's the lip compression. I think when he first starts with lip compression, and then when he's feeling a struggle, I think, Chase, that's when you see him retract his lips because he's looking for approval that, hey, I'm not going to be able to tell you this. His head drops down and to the right, and he starts to adapt. This is the first time we've seen that. And I think what they're asking him to do is to air dirty laundry, to shine a bright light on his own ugly baby. And he really can't do that today because he's held in a position of an insurance. He's a guarantor for that insurance, all that kind of stuff that he's tied to that the rest of the cast may or may not be. I also see his right hand illustrating as he's downright eye access and he's talking. I see a slight sneer, contempt at how long it took that helicopter to get out of there. That's why I think he's hiding a whole lot of something. We won't be able to tell that, but he does a deep draw in of a breath, and he pulls his lips in, a deep swallow, and moves his eyes down right. I think what we're seeing here is containment and him not being able to say things that he's been coached to stay away from and feeling contempt for somebody. Now, who it is, don't know all the details. I can just see containment. That's it.
We've all seen that picture of you off the set in that hour or so after the gun went off. What were you doing? What was going through your mind?
At the end she was laying there, and she was there for a while. I was amazed at how long they didn't get her in a car and get her out, but they waited and a helicopter came. And by the time the helicopter took off with her and literally lifted off, we were all glued to that process outside. When she finally left, I don't know how long it was. She was there 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It seemed like a very long time. But they kept saying, well, she's stable. Like nobody, just as you disbelieved that there was a live round in the gun, you disbelieved that this was going to be a fatal accident.
So you didn't know exactly how serious it was?
At the very end of my interview with the sheriff's department, they said to me, we regret to tell you that she didn't make it, she died. They told me right then and there. And that's when I went in the parking lot and called my wife to talk to my wife.
All right. Well, let's throw it around the room and let's everybody give 30 seconds or less on, or a minute or less, on what we think was going on and our thoughts on this group of videos. Mark, we'll start with you, go to Chase, and then Greg, and I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so I think just as you were saying there, Greg, there's liabilities there, there's culpabilities there as well. So I think some information, look, I think it comes across to me that it's well acted out that there was a real accident that happened here. I think after that moment, the story becomes very, very fuzzy. I think it could be that fuzzy story is about culpability and liability and certain details being held back about that. One other option is that does he feel he handled himself and his team in a way that would be respected by other people? It's interesting for me that he is, for want of a better word, triggered at the start of this interview by the word admired. She was admired. Did he act in an admirable way during this? I think that might be an issue. Complete conjecture, though, based on all this information that has come together and ideas that I have in my own little head. Chase, what do you think?
I think we're seeing a person who is mostly honest and deliberately concealing. And I think the deception that we're seeing here is not admitting to concealing that information deliberately. That might have been kind of a Rumsfeld known unknowns, but I think there's some hidden information that's deliberate, and we're expecting for him to say, just like we've seen in past videos, I can't talk about that. I don't want to talk about that right now, or I don't want to answer XYZ question. And I think saying things like that will be hard to do on a show that's literally titled Unscripted. It'd probably just be difficult. I think it was an accident. I think he feels bad about it. I think talking about how bad he feels would hurt him in court, or has the potential to hurt him in court. Greg?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is this is a person who has taken the life of someone accidentally. None of us think he put a round in the chamber and went and shot this lady. So just for a second, if you've ever hit a dog or a deer or any animal on the highway, think about how emotionally messed up you were for a short period of time. Most of us that are balanced. Something went through your head and there were millions of thoughts and trying to figure out what that meant. And I took something's life. Now, compound that by 1,000,000 times when it's a human being and someone you know, not someone who's trying to kill you, someone you know. So there's going to be all kinds of stuff going on in this guy's head, and it will go on for a long time. If you think that grief is compound, imagine grief at something that you caused. So this creates a whole new, he's going to have tons of guilt messaging and emblems and that kind of thing just because of that part, number one. Number two, he is a public person who has to do something. He feels like he has to do something. That'll probably come back to haunt him when he goes to civil or whatever kind of court case this turns into. But he feels like he has to do something. He has to get a message out. Guarantee you that there are things that he's not allowed to talk about by contractual obligation. And then there's some that his attorney has said, don't talk about. So we're seeing when people may say he looks deceptive or that, of course he's trying to hide something. And some of that may simply be feelings of guilt and inadequacy and. But I see mostly an honest guy who's telling you what he remembers. He brought certain things scripted, and he's hiding certain things to prevent telling you something that will cause harm to his contractual obligation in the future or to his family and. Scott, what do you got?
I think this whole thing was to build his wall of it's not my fault. It's not my fault wall. I think everything in this says that. From everything we didn't even show in here, all he's doing is building these bricks of it's not my fault. From even the woman that he shot, he says, she told me to point it at her. She told me to do this. All those things. He's building this little wall of it's not my fault. And I think you're right, Greg. I never thought about that helicopter situation before. He's calling on everybody. So I think that's what this is. And I think it was a goal. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're the ones that said, hey, here's what we want to do. We want to come out, and his publicist or whoever it was and said, let's do this. I don't think Stephanopoulos came to him and said, can we do an interview? I think he showed up with it, with the offer, I would think, because that's all this is his I didn't do it, or it was an accident wall. It's not my fault wall, in other words. All right, if you like what we're doing, please subscribe. Just press that little thing down there where it says YouTube. Subscribe, and you'll become a panelist. And then hit the little red bell and let you know we have a new episode come out. All right, fellas, that was a good one, and we'll see you next time.
See you.
Bisa, no, mañana se da, no, se